In our increasingly electrified society, that's where a resilient grid matters most. ITC Great Plains is ensuring the greater grid can meet our energy needs now and long into the future. Learn more at itc-holdings.com.
Welcome everyone to the first candidate forum at Salina Area Technical College. We, the Salina Tech Student Government Association, are very pleased to be hosting this event with the assistance of the League of Women Voters of Salina. My name is Thomas Brandt of the Machine Tool Technology Program. I am Vice President of the Student Government Association of SATC. To those that are standing, this is being broadcast in the student lounge across the hall, where there will be seating. We want to thank Smoky Hills PBS for broadcasting our event today. All candidates for U.S. Senate, U.S. House of Representatives, 1st District, Governor, Kansas Secretary of State, Attorney General, Treasurer, Insurance Commissioner, and School Board 7th District, as well as the candidates for the Kansas House from the 69th, 71st, and 107th Districts, and our 3 Saline County Commission candidates were invited to share with you today. Those who responded that they could not attend were given the opportunity to send a representative from their campaign or to send a written statement, and we do have some statements to read today. We'd like to welcome and introduce the candidates who accepted our invitation to be here today. Mark Holland for U.S. Senate. He can't be here, but his campaign representative Janice Norlin will answer questions on his behalf. Jeanna Repass for Secretary of State, Kyle Corcoran for Insurance Commissioner, Sarah Cruz for Kansas House 69th District, Stephen Howe for Kansas House 71st District, and James Weese, Saline County Commission number 4. We have received statements from Laura Kelly for Governor, Tracy Mann for U.S. House of Representatives, Chris Mann for Attorney General, Dennis Hirschberger for State School Board, and Clark Sanders for House 69th District. These statements will be read by our moderator. We do appreciate your willingness to attend today. Each time the Salina League does a candidate forum, they send questionnaires to the candidates for them to complete. We have copies of those questionnaires that were returned to us on the table in the hall, and answers can also be accessed on the League's website, www.lwvsalina.org. We are pleased to have with us our local media panel and Charles Rankin of the Salina Journal, Robert Klingenberg of Salina Media Connection, and Gene Kozabowski of Kansas Wesleyan University. And finally, our moderator today will be Ann Zimmerman, Vice President of the League of Women Voters of Salina. I will turn this over to you.
Thank you, Thomas. Thanks for that introduction. I want to welcome you all here today. I am Ann Zimmerman, Vice President of the Salina League of Women Voters, and my co-moderator is Margaret Wyatt, Treasurer of the Salina League of Women Voters. Today's forum is an initiative of the Salina Tech Student Government. They wanted to hear from candidates, and they asked the League of Women Voters to assist them since we have held many candidate forums. We appreciate the chance to spotlight candidates running for office. We encourage others to consider running for office, and we urge everyone to vote. You can register to vote in this election up to October 18th, and we recommend that you do that at the website ksvotes.org. The Salina League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization of women and men of every age, race, and background and political belief. Through more than 1,200 local leagues, state leagues, and the national organization, league members work to promote citizen action on local, state, and national issues. The League as an organization does not support any individual candidates or parties. Our goal for today's forum is to provide voters with information about candidates in the races on the ballot for November 8th, the November 8th election. Also on the November 8th election ballot are 2 new proposed constitutional amendments and several judges and justices up for retention votes. We will have more information about those things at our Fall Issues Forum on October 20th, and we'll say more about that later. Voters may vote in person on November 8th or in advance in the office of their county clerk, which in Salina is at the City County Building. If you prefer to complete a mail-in ballot, you can request one from the county clerk. We thank the Salina Tech student government for working with us. We thank Salina Tech for the use of this room. We also thank Smoky Hill PBS for being here to video the event and for live streaming it on their Smoky Hills PBS Facebook page. Smoky Hills will also be rebroadcasting it later and will be able, it will be available to stream at the Salina Tech website, salinatech.edu, and at the Salina League of Women Voters website, LWVsalina.org. Some of the candidates answered a questionnaire, as Thomas told you, and those are available out in the hallway and on the League's website, lwvsalina.org. We've already introduced our candidates, and we will be reading our candidate statements from several of the candidates who responded to our invitation to do that and were unable to be with us today. We will read that during the section with the candidates giving their opening statements. Now I want to introduce Margaret Wyatt, Treasurer of the Salina League of Women Voters.
My job is to review the format and the rules of this event. First of all, each candidate will have 1 minute for their opening statement and closing statement. The moderators will read statements from those who have sent statements but could not be here. Ann just mentioned that. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer each question. The moderator will call on candidates at her discretion, trying to give everyone a chance to answer a reasonable number of questions. Here are the timekeeper rules. There are our timekeepers. At the beginning of your 1 minute, green will be held up to say you have 45 seconds of green. After 45 seconds, you will have 15 seconds of yellow. At red, you are supposed to stop. And I don't know if they're going to say stop or if something is going to beep, but then it's over. There should be paper on the chairs. As you think of questions, write them down and someone will collect them. Reading the candidate's statements. I'll start with, are we going to make these 1 minute?
1 minute, yes.
So you let me know and I'll just stop at 1 minute. To the League of Women Voters, this is from Laura Kelly and David Tolan. I'm sorry I couldn't be there to join you in person today. I greatly appreciate your hard work and advocacy to make Kansas a better place for everyone to live and raise a family. 4 years ago, I ran for governor in order to get our state back on track after the prior administration left our state in a really tough place. Our government was not working for all Kansans. Our schools were underfunded, our roads and bridges were crumbling, and our economy was in free fall. And now, despite all the challenges we faced these last few years here in Kansas, we are back on track. We balanced our budget every year, we fully funded our schools, we recruited some of the biggest employers in the country to come to Kansas, and surpassed more than $14 billion in new business investment. We cut $1 billion in taxes, especially for working people who need it, like the food tax and property taxes, as we are paying down debt and making a record investment in the state's rainy day fund. Are we going to read that? Do you want to?
Next is Janice.
Okay, Janice, you can speak for Mark Holland.
Correct. Okay. Ready? I am Janice Norlin, and I am proud to represent Reverend Mark Holland this afternoon. Mark is campaigning statewide and sends his regrets that he can't be here. These are his words. The election on November 8th presents a choice between two very different views of America. I choose the America that looks forward to what is next. I believe our best years are ahead of us, and I seek to embrace the future, unafraid. My opponent wants to make America something it used to be. I choose to look forward to a collaborative future. Growing up, I never thought it was fair that my dad was the preacher at my church and my mom was a teacher at my school. Yet this upbringing taught me the values of service and accountability. These are the same values that I have worked to instill in my own 4 children, and these are the values that I bring to elected office. I was former county commissioner of Wyandotte County, former mayor of Kansas City, Kansas, and I know no Democrat or Republican way to pave a street. There is no Democrat or Republican way to pave a street. Perfect.
Well done.
Thank you.
The next statement is from Congressman Tracy Mann, running again for the 1st District. I'm Congressman Tracy Mann, and I am proud to represent the big 1st District of Kansas in the United States House of Representatives. I like to think of the Big First as the pilot light of America because the values that make America great are still alive and well here. People here in Kansas live their lives by faith, family, hard work, and personal responsibility. I spent my first term in Congress advocating for these Kansas conservative values and for agriculture first and foremost. I stood for the right to life and used my vote on the House floor to protect our Second Amendment rights at every opportunity. I'm running for re-election to keep fighting to make our country stronger, and we have a lot of work to do. We need to curb inflation, fix our struggling supply chains, secure our southern border, push back on big government socialism, and stop wasting taxpayer dollars. If you want a 5th-generation Kansan who cares deeply about our values, our struggles, and our way of life, working to represent us in Washington, D.C., please vote for me.
Jeanna Repass, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So, it's now time for you to make your opening statement.
1 whole minute. Well, here we go. My name is Jeanna Repass. I am so honored to be the Democratic nominee for Secretary of State. I'm the first ever African-American woman to ever hold this nomination. I will be the 2nd woman ever to hold this office in the state of Kansas. I am running to be the Secretary of State, which should be a nonpartisan role. Even though I am running as a Democrat, it should be a nonpartisan administrative role to solely and strictly protect your right to vote. I know there are questions about our previous voting processes, and my job is to come in, answer those questions, make every Kansas feel safe and secure about casting your vote, and to do it with lots of transparency. As your Secretary of State, you will never have a question that isn't answered. In addition to that, I am dedicated to making sure our business processes are as simple as possible. I will say this. I'm excited to answer your questions. I have been running a statewide race. I know how hard it is for all the candidates to be here. I'm here, and I'm excited to answer your questions. Thank you so much.
I'm now going to read the statement from Lynn Rogers, running for State Treasurer. I'm going to take a moment to talk about incumbent State Treasurer Lynn Rogers, who couldn't be here because he is traveling across the state working to support Kansans in every way he can. I want to take this time to tell you about some of the things that he has done to modernize the State Treasurer's office after the day-to-day operations had been neglected by those using it as a political springboard for Congress. That meant getting rid of 1980s banking practices that created long delays and risks of errors while not helping local officials to be able to effectively manage bond payments. There was no reason for Kansas to be so far behind the times, so we fixed it and invested in our software to make it much easier to return dollars to Kansans. Treasurer Rogers has the experience required to do this job and to do it well. He spent his professional career as an ag banker working for the Federal Land Bank, supporting the financial needs of farmers across Kansas. This role gave him the skills to run the Treasurer's office.
The next statement is from Clark Sanders, who is running against Sarah Cruz. She will get to have her 1 minute after this. So here is the statement from Clark Sanders. I am sorry I cannot attend today's forum. I am disappointed that I was not consulted about my availability on this date. The reason I am not here is because I am on my way back to Kansas from the Chicago area after having attended my mother's 90th birthday party. After my faith, family is the next priority in my life. I'm sure many of you are familiar with me. I co-hosted a program on KSAL called Friendly Fire for 22 years, and my views on many topics are public and well known. I am a conservative Republican, and I check all the conservative boxes. I am pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, pro-business, pro-agriculture, pro-small government. I have the voting record to support these claims. I am endorsed by Kansans for Life, the NRA, with an A rating, Kansas Family Voice, Kansas Farm Bureau, and Americans for Prosperity, among others. I see one of the top priorities in the upcoming legislative session as expanding rural broadband internet. Who's next? Oh, Sarah.
Okay, Sarah, you're up.
Thanks, and I'm Sarah Cruz, and by way of introduction, I just want to mention that my father was a pastor for the United Church of Christ, and I was raised understanding the importance of speaking up, especially when it comes to issues of social justice and human rights. I am a proud American. I've voted in every election since I turned 18, and along with my husband of 33 years, have raised two wonderfully socially engaged young women. There are many issues that I'm concerned about that we'll be discussing in this forum, but when the U.S. Supreme Court made the Dobbs decision and overturned Roe v. Wade and our constitutional right to reproductive health care, and the Republicans in the legislature here in Kansas slipped the so-called Value Them Both Amendment onto the primary ballot, I decided that it was time for me to run so that I can have a voice protecting our rights rather than taking them away. I can turn my clock back 1 hour this fall, but I refuse to turn it back 50 years.
Kansas House of Representatives, District 71, unopposed.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Stephen Howe. I appreciate the Salina Tech Governing Association as well as Salina League of Women Voters for hosting this forum, and appreciate all that are tuning in out there. I'm a father and a husband. I've got 5 children, 3 of which are school-aged. I've lived in Salina for 17 years. My wife and I own the Tamara Howe School of Dance for 16 years. Right now, when I'm not in the legislature, I work as a commercial pesticide applicator, and I've taught 5th grade at Cornerstone Classical School for 2 years, but prior to coming to the legislature. It's a real honor to serve the people of the 71st District in Topeka. I look forward to working on many of the challenges that are before us and working not only on those things, but in a bipartisan fashion to get things done.
I will be reading the statement for Dennis Hirschberger, who's running for the State Board of Education. I am an unapologetic conservative who wants to see K through 12 education that focuses on academic excellence, fundamental skills, and strong character development. I believe that the regressive leftist ideology being advanced by the political, cultural, and intellectual elite is putting the future of children at risk by substituting solid fundamentals, the 3 R's, and classical education with social, emotional-based theories that focus on victimhood instead of self-responsibility. I am also concerned that our children are being exposed to illicitly sexual material at young ages, potentially without parental or legal guardian knowledge. I will stand against those that wish to advance an agenda of unhealthy sexual deviance and will do my best to assure that state educational materials are not sexually inappropriate. The cultural wave of transgenderism is destroying the proper relationship of male and female, creating confusion and causing a level of hopeless.
The next on our list of statements is Joe Hay.
Yeah.
He is running unopposed for County Commission District. Can you remind me what? 5? Okay, thank you. Here is Joe Hay's statement. I'm really looking forward to taking office in January as the District 5 Saline County Commissioner. Saline County is at a crossroads and we have a lot of things going in the county. I look forward to working with all the county departments during my 4-year term. I am also looking forward to working with the other commissioners on the board. Saline County is growing and I look forward to a chance to be part of it. I also look forward to working with the city and the city staff and the city commissioners on various projects for the county and the city. I also look for the input of the citizens and for the citizens to put me in office again. Again, I look forward to the next 4 years and hope to see big things for Saline County. Joe Hay.
Our final opening statement will be from Jim Weese, who's running unopposed for Saline County Commission District Number 4. Sorry.
Four, yeah. Thank you. First, let me thank the Salina League of Women Voters and the Salina Tech Student Government Association for the opportunity to participate in this forum today. For those who aren't familiar with me, my name is Jim Weese. I have been a citizen of Saline County for over 55 years. I've been married 46 years to my wife, Mary Pat, who grew up in Salina and has been a teacher and coach in the Salina area for over 40 years. We have 4 children and 10 grandchildren. I spent a 32-year career with the Salina Fire Department, moving up the ranks and retiring in 2011 at the rank of battalion chief. While working at the SFD, I was a partner in a successful general construction company for over 10 years. The past 6 years, I have represented the 4th District on the Saline County Commission and would love the opportunity to serve another 4 years. Thank you.
The next part of our candidate forum involves having questions from our media panel. Those include Charles Rankin from the Salina Journal, Robert Klingenberg from Salina Media Connection, and Gene Kozabowski, formerly with the Salina Journal, now with Kansas Westland. We appreciate their participation so much because we've been scrambling around a little bit to find people to take those spots. We're going to start with Charles Rankin. They will be asking questions to particular candidates since there's pretty much no way you can ask one question that all of you in your different offices can answer. So we're going to leave it up to them for a while to decide who to ask and what question to ask. Let's start with Charles Rankin.
Okay, I'm going to start with the Kansas House candidates, if that's all right. So this past year, the Kansas legislature passed procedures to legalize sports gambling in the state. That rolled out in the past couple months. So my question is, how do you feel that rollout went? Do you feel like there is more to be done to expand that or to find more revenue and potentially pass more legislature to find other revenue sources such as sports gambling in the state?
I think we'll start with Sarah Cruz.
Okay. Although Stephen was actually in the legislature when they passed that. Might have a little bit more knowledge about the subject than I do. Yeah, I mean, I'm not exactly sure how the rollout went. I do know that it happened quite quickly when the food tax was going to happen. It could have happened on July 1st. And rather than do it that way, the Republican majority decided it would be better to incrementally roll that out over the course of 3 years. So I'm not quite sure how something like sports gambling could happen so quickly in 4 months, but in order to save the rest of us shopping on our grocery bills, that tax has to be very slowly, incrementally rolled out over 3 years.
Yes, so sports wagering is something that's come up in the last 2 years since I first took office. I ended up voting against the bill on the House floor both years. The first year I took office, which would have been 2021, it failed on the House floor. It just collapsed. It became a Christmas tree bill. So many things were put in for so many different special interests, it just fell over. Year 2, I think some people were bound and determined to get it done at all cost, including circumventing the House procedures of doing business. Ultimately, it never passed out of my House committee, which is Federal and State Affairs, and they just brought it directly to the House floor for a vote, which went in late into the night. And so I voted against it for that reason, lack of transparency, and I just don't think it's a good deal for Kansas.
Robert Klingenberg?
Yes, I have a question for Jeanna Repass. We live in a time where fears of voter fraud permeate through our society. What can you do as Secretary of State to help alleviate those fears?
Thank you for the question. First and foremost, transparency, transparency, transparency. Whether you agree or not that there was fraud or that there was any issues with the last election, those voices need to be heard. Those concerns have to be addressed. If we do not reinstill confidence in our voting process, we don't have a democracy. And the only way to do that is to shine a light on what people are elevating as a concern. I will tell you, I've said all along, I am the Democratic nominee, but this should be a nonpartisan role addressing solely and only the concerns related to voting. And what I will do is make sure we have a complete and transparent process to address every concern. The other thing I'm going to do, and I've said this many times over, we will have a nonpartisan, not bipartisan, nonpartisan commission to hear all voices concerned, and then all of the things that are brought to the table will be done and elevated completely transparently.
Jean Kozubowski.
I have a question for the House candidates. I don't know if you noticed, but it's been hot this summer. And there's been a lot of stories in the news about water in the state as well as out of the state. So what role do you see the House playing in maybe addressing climate change?
That's a big question. You know, I believe it was Governor Sam Brownback years ago made it a priority to talk about water, especially as it relates to western Kansas and the Ogallala Aquifer. That's something that's been continued under Governor Kelly's leadership as well. The legislature did consider a bill as it pertains to water this last session. However, I think there were too many issues unresolved that a lot of ag groups couldn't get behind. So we have to look for ways that we can get their support. I believe over 80%, if not more, water that is consumed and used in the state of Kansas is used for agriculture. So we need to make sure that we do things in a way that doesn't hurt us economically, but also ensures we're a good steward of our resources. So I'm open to learning more about what those issues are, and I look forward to working on that in the next session.
Yeah, it is a complicated issue. It's a complex issue, and Steve's right. It definitely affects. Most of the water is being used in western Kansas. You know, the Ogallala Aquifer is going down and draining, and it's something that we've been aware of for years. And I think one of the ways is to collaborate now with people on the ground who are dealing with it themselves, not only the farmers, but researchers and organizations that are already doing the work and the research, conservationists, and developing water smart crops and farming management systems, and working together with those who are already trying to figure this out. But yeah, climate change is a huge issue. I'm glad that we're able to talk about it as if it's real, because it is. But for a long time, you know, even saying that, you know, you're either a denier or a, anyway. So.
Charles.
Yes, I have a question for Ms. Norlin on behalf of the Senate candidate. Yeah. Go ahead, yes. So I'll be asking Ms. Norlin a question. Recently, within the past few months, President Biden announced plans for student loan forgiveness. That's currently being battled, I think today even, in courts, higher courts in the upper chambers of different U.S. courts. If that does happen to be struck down, what is the Senate candidates, would the Senate candidate be in support of continuing that discussion and that fight for student loan forgiveness to the millions or thousands of people that have student loans in the country?
And I want to preface the answer by saying these are Mark's words. We predicted this question. He predicted this. I support President Biden offering relief for student loans based on income. The cost of higher education is spiraling out of reach of the middle class, and it is the foundation of the middle class. My opponent is against student loan forgiveness. Senator Jerry Moran said in a news release via Twitter, this move will only increase inflation. August 24th, 2022. There's no doubt that, I'm not going to read Moran's quote. Suffice it to say that Mark Holland is in favor of President Biden's program.
Thank you. Robert.
I have a question for Ms. Norlin. What is Mark Holland's stance on our healthcare system? And what would he like to see implemented relating to it?
Well, he does have a statement that I would like to read, comparing his views with his opponents on that issue. I back our seniors, and I will protect Social Security and Medicare. My opponent voted against Medicare, negotiating better prescription medicine costs for Kansas seniors, and he voted against capping the cost of insulin. I think if Reverend Holland were here, he would say that he would support Medicare for all.
A question for Ms. Repass. You had talked about making voting transparency, but you also mentioned making running businesses as simple as possible. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
I certainly can. So the Secretary of State of Kansas has two primary roles. One is being the Chief Elections Officer, certifying and securing elections, and the other is being the business registry repository for the state of Kansas. And right now we are running on an antiquated business system. If you are an entrepreneur and you're trying to start a business, whether that is fertilizer or whether you're running a barbershop or whatever, you want to open up a bar restaurant, you have the most arduous process to get through the Secretary of State's website. And what we should have is a one-stop shop where people who come to Kansas who want to start businesses can go in there and do your applications, get your registry done, and it should be a seamless integration so you don't have to go back and forth to different websites. We're at a trade school. When these young men and women get out of here and they want to start their own HVAC industry or business, that ought to be a seamless process for them and as simple as possible. We are going to upgrade that website immediately.
Thank you. Charles.
I have a question for Mr. Weese. Just this year, we broke ground on the new jail here in the county. Believe you were part of making some of that happen. As that process is continuing into next year, and I believe the plan is to have it open by the end of 2023. What other plans do you see what other things do you see the county commission can do to help with criminal justice, to help with some of the reform that is going on in that section of the county?
Well, thank you for the question. One thing that the county can do and is working on now is with the community corrections, whether it be through the drug court process where people who have been arrested have the opportunity to work themselves through it and not have those charges hanging over them or that indictment sitting on them. Another thing is using communication devices that allow corrections officers to get a hold of the probationary people to make sure they make their court dates. So many, if you watch the bookings, you'll see that so many of the arrests are for probation violations and this and that. To try to limit those type of reoccurring events is something that is happening now and just getting off the ground.
Robert.
I have a question for the state representative candidates. If you could pass one thing in your next term or institute a policy of some variety, what would that one thing be?
Is that right, or was it you?
It's me, I think.
Oh,
Did
is
we
it?
start
Okay.
again this time? Yeah. I'm most interested in passing Medicaid expansion. I feel like that is something that is absolutely necessary, and it's kind of shocking to me that we haven't done this already. We're one of 12 states who has not expanded Medicaid, And there may be a question about this later, but right now I'll let you know that it affects about 160,000 Kansans that are falling into a healthcare coverage gap, including working families and 7,400 veterans. And so the amount of people who would be helped, not to mention the $5.5 billion we've left on the table since 2014, I believe it is. This year alone, $1.3 billion of federal dollars that Kansans have not received because we haven't expanded Medicaid.
Thank you. Stephen. Howe.
Yes, thank you for the question. Very important one, I guess. It's kind of exciting to think that, you know, if you're given the opportunity to pass one thing, what would it be? However, I know in reality I'm one of 125 members of the Kansas House of Representatives, and there's 40 senators. So I know the process isn't as simple as it may seem. However, if I could pass one bill in the next legislative session, it would be to fully fund special education. As I'm learning in my first 2 years in office, if we don't fully fund special education, those dollars are diverted from the general ed population. In Salina, it could mean up to $1 million. And what that lack of funding does, it could mean that some class sizes have 30 kids in it, or things like that. So I want to work on that piece of legislation in the next session because it...
Stop. Thank you. I left Jean.
Okay, for the House candidates again. We had a shooting at a high school in Salina. We've had guns stolen out of cars several times in the city. There have been problems with guns at schools in Wichita. What is your position on gun control?
Okay. I generally don't think the solution is always more laws as it pertains to guns or weapons. I don't know all the details of what happened yesterday at South High School. I do know it's totally inexcusable for a student to discharge a firearm on school property. It's against the law, and I believe he or she, I don't know, is going to face the, they're going to have consequences in the judicial system. I do think it's time for our community to come alongside our teachers, administrators, to show them that we fully support them in disciplining children for bad behavior, or even high schoolers, young adults. These things need to be dealt with swiftly and with firmness. If you don't do that, I think these things fester and become more of an issue.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, I think maybe we should refer to it as gun safety rather than gun control. I think that this is a subject that we have a lot more in common on than we're sort of led to believe. There's been a public policy poll that says that 83% of Americans are interested in rational restrictions, gun laws around like the loophole buying at gun shows and a waiting period, or having a waiting period before you're able to buy a gun. And even 73% or something of the gun owners agree that this is a good idea. I should mention that I am a gun sense candidate through Moms Demand Action.
Ms. Repass, obviously if you are elected, you'd be the chief elections officer of the state. That comes with a pretty expansive duty to allow citizens to vote. What do you see as in that role as a way to expand access to voter registration, and also as a way to expand access to getting to the ballot, whether it's mail-in voting, advance voting? What types of pieces of that puzzle do you feel the Secretary of State's office can help in?
All in 60 seconds, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me start with, I believe that we have really good access right now, quite frankly. And I'm not going to try to pivot too much from that question, but the first and foremost concern is making sure that people believe in the security and the sanctity of our vote. So that'll be the first thing. But we do have access points right now, and you can go and register online. I believe did you ask about expanding access to ballots? Okay, Kansas passed a law 3 years ago about being able to vote anywhere in your county. That has not been fully implemented. It's not a mandate of every county, but the counties that want to do that, the Secretary of State needs to work with them to do that. And then we need to take a deep dive look into our access via vote-in and absentee ballots. So that's something I will tell you. The first thing I will do is come in and do a SWOT analysis, because it has to happen. And then we will decide at that point where we have holes and what we have opportunities and where our strengths are.
Robert, I think this may be the last question. Jean, I think you're off the hook for the last question, but we are running out of time of this section of our forum, so we'll go ahead with Robert.
For Ms. Norlin, as well as the state representatives. Just recently, President Joe Biden announced a round of pardons for simple marijuana possession charges at the federal level. With your campaigns, what is your stance on either the legalization or decriminalization of marijuana?
Oh, Janice, go ahead.
Again, I will remind you that these are Reverend Holland's words, and also I need to ask you to be sure and check out his website, hollandforkansas.com. I know he has a lot more to say than what this will be, but he predicted this one too. This is his word. These are his words. I support President Biden's federal pardons for marijuana possession. The war on drugs has filled our prisons. We can do better by offering addiction treatment and mental health services. I also support the president for keeping violent criminals behind bars.
Thank you. I think we're ready for Sarah Cruz. Did I get that wrong again? No, that's right. Okay.
I also support the decriminalization of marijuana possession. It's a nonviolent crime, and it's a huge drain on our communities in so many ways, locking up people for possession and how much it costs to keep people in jails and prisons, and not to mention what it does to a family. So I absolutely support that decriminalization move. And was that the end of the question? Yeah. Okay.
All right, Stephen Howe?
I guess I had a follow-up question to your question. I did hear just about President Biden's announcement, but I wasn't sure about the specifics. Was it pardons for specific people that are currently incarcerated? Or was it to reschedule it from a class 1 to class 2?
It is a three-part action. The first of which is a federal pardon for federal convictions only. So state-level convictions, as part of his second directive, he's advised the governors of the 50 states to examine the ability to pardon as well. And then the third part of his action is to research the rescheduling procedure.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that. I don't get all the news all the time, so I appreciate being able to ask you a question. But this is something that's come up in the state legislature. Medical marijuana is what it's being called. I voted against it, but I did offer an amendment to improve it. If it's going to be treated as medical, it should be prescribed by a doctor, and it should be dispensed by a licensed pharmacist. They understand how this could affect other drug interactions. They understand the health and human body and how it works. And so if it's going to be treated as medical, I think it should be done through our medical professionals who have the education and training to do so. And I do think judges should have discretion to make decisions on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, now it is time for questions from the students of Salina Tech. And Mr. Weese, do you have to leave early?
No, I canceled that.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Tara Doolahary, and I am the Student Government Association Body President. And I have a question for the general group of panelists here today. in regards to the state constitutional amendment regarding the sheriff's appointing or voting in, do you see a benefit in the state electing a sheriff by state, and what are the drawbacks to that?
Let's see. Why don't we start with Jim Weese?
Okay, I'm sorry, but I'd like to hear the question one more
I
time.
can repeat the question. Regarding the state constitutional amendment regarding the voting or appointing of sheriffs, do you see a benefit in the state electing that sheriff, or what would be the drawbacks to that?
Well, I can just go by what I've been familiar with here in Saline County. I believe that the election of our sheriff through the years has worked. It's been a good process. We've always had candidates. Rarely does the sheriff run unopposed, so I appreciate the electing the sheriff as on a county basis.
Stephen Howe?
Yes, thank you for the question. It's this proposed constitutional amendment came before my committee on federal and state affairs. I did support it out of committee as well as on the House floor. Kansas has 105 counties. All but one county elects a county sheriff. In the early 70s, Riley County consolidated the Manhattan Police Department with the county sheriffs. So they have the Riley County Police Department. I think there's a general fear because of defund the police movement and things like that in some urban areas that this proposed constitutional amendment came about. I do think electing your county sheriff is the best way to do it in order to hold them accountable for their actions, for their presence in the community, and ensuring public safety.
Sarah Cruz?
Thank you. Maybe Steve can answer this better, but the amendment, the question in the amendment is what?
I think it's a question of whether the county should be able to elect their own sheriff, or whether it should be appointed by state judicial government. And
I see.
So the state constitutional amendment would just basically take what's in statute and enshrine it in the Kansas Constitution. So I guess in a way it's making it a stronger case for the office of the sheriff. So it's currently in a state statute. That's how you elect your top law enforcement officer in your county. But this would add it, enshrine it in the Kansas Constitution.
And by and large, it would take some power away from our governor.
Not the governor.
So
No, governors do not appoint county sheriffs.
Don't we have a thing, a little handout that indicates what's going on?
Okay, oh good, there it is. Yeah.
Sarah, do you want to answer it?
Well, it seems to me, just based on that, I don't see the necessity of enshrining something like this into our Constitution. You know, it seems to be if it ain't broke, don't fix it, kind of a situation as far as I'm concerned.
Jeanna?
I'm going to tell you, I think you should always be cautious when your legislature is asking you to amend your Constitution. And you need to look at that verbiage very carefully. I appreciate that we have one of our representatives in here, but even in that answer, please hear the confusion in the room. Kansas Constitution is very sound, and we need to look very, very carefully before you vote, which it is your right to do, on whether or not to make that amendment. I personally vote for my sheriff. I'm the daughter of a career law enforcement officer. He's a Vietnam veteran. I'm very proud of my father. Career law enforcement. I believe that that should be county by county, and I am not sure why we continue to have constitutional amendments being brought forward. And if we are, these need to be clear and concise. The very fact that I'm watching heads nod and shake in this room tells me that we need to be very careful about every time we put something forward to amend the Constitution of the great state of Kansas. So my answer is no, I am not in favor of that. Vote for your local sheriff.
Janice?
I'm going to predict that Mark would say ditto. So.
Okay.
All right, so I got a question for Mr. Stephen Howe. So when updating controlled substance classes in the House bill earlier this year, why were cannabis products excluded from the bill, and is that being worked on in another way, or is it being ignored despite the massive shift nationwide on the topic?
I don't believe that, at least in the Kansas House, we voted to reschedule marijuana because that's on the federal schedule. We have dealt with some bills relating to hemp, industrial hemp production and things like that, but I don't recall a specific bill that I worked on or voted on for marijuana per se. I think there was some amendment about changing what it was called in the medical marijuana bill between medical cannabis or medical marijuana, but you know, this last session I voted on over 300 different bills, so maybe I'm overlooking something. So I'd be glad to visit with you afterwards to learn a little bit more about that.
Okay, thank you.
Sarah, do you want to take this question too?
No, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, next question.
I have a general question. How do you intend to address the housing shortage in Kansas or Salina? Can you repeat that? How do you intend? Oh, sorry. How do you intend to address the housing shortage in Salina?
Let's start with Jeanna.
Oh, yay. Well, I will tell you, I've had the privilege of traveling the state with our current state treasurer, and I've learned a lot about, there's so many things in terms of rural development. There are actual loans that the state of Kansas has, and you can go to the Kansas State Treasurer's website. Lynn Rogers, by the way, my full-throat endorsement. He's a banker who is a lifetime advocate for really how to take care of your money, but we can get loans to help people who live in rural communities. And I will tell you, housing is an issue all over the place right now, everywhere, and especially in rural communities. I know for a fact that there's a community in southwestern Kansas that couldn't keep a doctor because they couldn't get a house for them. So that is a top priority. As your Secretary of State, I will tell you I have very limited access to that, but I would encourage our state legislature to continue to look at tax breaks and incentives to help us with building, but also elect Lynn Rogers as your state treasurer. That's going to be the quickest way to get some rural loans in to help you, to help us get more development for housing.
Janice Norlin.
This isn't quite on point, but Mark did address the issue of backing working families. He does back working families. I think that the federal government, at least in my lifetime, has had a role in housing. I think it's been pretty minimal in the last, I don't know how many years. I think that the federal government can do something about housing, and I think he would be interested in that. But his quote about I back working families is, my opponent voted against the bipartisan infrastructure bill that is bringing $3.8 billion of real jobs and real wages to Kansas. And if that's the case, then I would think that maybe the housing could kind of happen along with that.
Jim Weese.
Well, I know in the past 6 years the Saline County and the City Commission of Salina have come together and worked to resolve a lot of things. And we have built a pretty good partnership right now. With the ARPA funds that the county just received, over $1 million went to the city to help with infrastructure on new construction residential areas. Another $50,000 went to work on the Magnolia Road between K-State Salina and the city of Salina. So I think everyone working as a team, knowing that if the county does better, the city does better. If the city does better, the county does better. And just working, having the same goal in mind and working together and not duplicating actions, I think, is the answer.
Stephen Howe.
So housing is probably the #1 issue that I heard from city and county leaders during this past session in the legislature. I worked alongside Senator Clays, our local delegation, Representative Clark Sanders. I worked with House leadership, Senate leadership, and we secured $20 million to bring back to Salina to help our housing needs here locally. We've had expansions that are taking place right now with Kubota, Great Plains, as well as Schwann's, and we need to make sure that there's housing available for these new positions that are being created. So $20 million was brought. The city is working with developers on how to utilize those monies in a I guess, a wise fashion. And so, you know, with everything going on lately, I think there's been some hiccups, but I'm hopeful that some things are going to come down the pike. Thank you.
Sarah Cruz.
Thank you. It's really encouraging to hear from both of these gentlemen sitting next to me things that are already happening and in process because of the new, you know, Schwann's expansion and things that are happening with Great Plains and Kubota, as he mentioned. Having affordable housing available is key, and as Jeanna mentioned, you know, really taking not advantage, but taking advantage, having access to these loans and these programs and bringing it back to Saline County, to make this a community that we're all proud to live in and can afford to be in and work in.
Hello, this is a question for everyone. What are your plans to address labor shortages in the area and in the state?
Let's start with Stephen Howe.
Well, I wish I had a plan. You know, I've got 5 children, and I'm very blessed. I would encourage more people to have children. I know it's difficult. There's a lot of sacrifice that is made, but promoting a culture of life is something I think that is important. As the birth rate goes down in a negative fashion, it hurts programs, social programs. It hurts Social Security because the current workforce is paying for those programs. So as we have an aging population, less people in the workforce paying for those programs is going to cause a lot of issues. So I think it's a very tough and complex issue, and I too wonder where we're going to find all these people to fill these positions here locally. But it's a great quality of life here in Salina, Kansas and Saline County. We have a lot to offer here, and so I would encourage anybody listening to come, move, and raise a family here in Salina.
Sarah
Thank
Cruz.
you.
Thank you. I think really taking a look at some of these tax incentives and ways to make starting businesses easier, a little more streamlined, that's gonna make a big difference. As well as really supporting families to want to stay in these communities where they've been educated and stay here in Kansas through fully funding education and special education included in that, as well as creating affordable child care situations. Often that is the thing that is keeping people from really being able to work, is that they can't find a place to safely and affordably take care of their children in the early years.
Jeanna Repass?
Yes, well, here it's a two-pronged approach. Number one, we're sitting in a technical school right now, and thank God for them. And we have got to invest in more of these trades. Everyone doesn't have to go to a 4-year university and take on that level of debt to be productive and constructive to add to the workforce in Kansas. So we need to support these 2-year and trade schools and these technical schools. And, this is a two and we have got to make sure that we are educating a base that's going to be the people who build our next microchips. We've got to do both and Kansas is a great place to do that. And we need to make sure we have tax incentives. We need to make sure that we are supporting our state colleges and universities and our technical schools. And we can do that in so many ways. And as the Secretary of State, we're going to make sure that, again, business integration, making businesses easier to register, start, and have entrepreneurship. And we can do those things, Kansas, and we can improve the quality of our workforce. I think I got that question.
Janice Norlin.
I love sitting behind her. Partly because I know that Reverend Holland and Jeanna have been traveling the state together. And so I would say ditto, and I would also go back to the question that was earlier posed about loan forgiveness Education has become so expensive, and I think that the fact that Mark supports the loan offering relief for student loans, education, area tech schools, all of that, all of the above.
And last, Jim Weese.
Well, let me say the county shares in the heartache of trying to hire in today's market. We are anywhere from 11 to 15 corrections officers short right now, and trying to fill that void. You can raise wages, you can do a lot of things, but that's just kind of gets the ball rolling on down the line. I believe the answer is, and I have a grandson right now enrolled in the police science course here at Salina Tech. I think promoting technical schools, places, and finding a way to finance our youth into these places so that they can learn and get the tools they need and not come out of it with a large debt. And especially in the technical school realm, whether it be through private industry or whether it be through state, county, federal subsidies that get our, thank you.
Another question? This will probably be the last one.
Thank you, folks. I do have one more from the student body. This is for our House representatives. Considering all the destructive threats, an example, the shooting at South High yesterday, what are we doing or what will you do to protect our students and staff in the public schools, including schools like ours?
Sarah, do you want to start?
This seems to me to be, there ought to be a simple answer, but it seems like it's a lot more complicated than that. I know that there are safety measures that can easily be implemented, like keeping doors locked and that sort of thing. But the larger issue with gun safety is really a uniquely American issue. And we all know that we're outnumbered by guns, you know, by the population. How many guns outnumbers the population? And I think all of us want to feel safe. We want to feel safe sending our kids to school or going to a parade or going to the grocery store. So there's a lot that needs to shift in the culture and for all of us to feel safe. And I'm not sure that Steve or I could do anything to ensure.
Steve, you want to go next?
I agree with Sarah. It's a really complex issue. I think it ultimately is a local issue. You know, how do you safely secure your schools and the families you're entrusted with, whether you're a private school or a public school? I know Salina Public Schools has over 6,000 students they're responsible for. And sometimes the home life isn't always optimal. So there's a lot of challenges that teachers are facing, educators are facing, a lot of dynamics besides just teaching math, science, and reading, and things that interrupt their day, take resources away from their mission of teaching kids and the students' job of learning. So I don't have any easy answers for you, but I'd be willing to hear some ideas of what the state could do to support local communities. So.
Does anybody else want to take this question?
Was it on gun safety?
Keeping, yeah.
Gun safety and protecting our schools.
Well, that's a little bit outside the purview of Secretary of State, but I will tell you, someone who volunteered in my son's second grade class, he's a college freshman. This was a little while ago. I was in that room when we had to do a code red drill. And if you've ever seen 7-year-olds hide under their desk in the dark, it will change your life forever. We are a Second Amendment house, and I'm going to tell you we have multiple guns. If you break into our house, you're going to have a rough time. I'm just going to be very honest with you. But guns don't belong in our schools. We have to have common sense gun safety, and first and foremost, our job is to educate our kids, not teach them to hide from that. And I think we have a state legislature that understands the importance of that. I would encourage you to reach out to your representatives, tell them to take up this measure, and then continue to fund the things that we need in public education so that we can have security on all of those campuses, from elementary school right through our trade schools. So that's just my personal statement on it. Vote. From your
Jim or Janice, do either of you want to take the question?
Well, I would remind the public that Reverend Holland was mayor of Kansas City, Kansas. He was on the Wyandotte County Commission. He has experience in these issues on a local level, and now he's running for a federal office, U.S. Senator. So at the federal level, his statement is, "I support common sense gun reform." Just a few weeks ago, Democrats and moderate Republicans voted for modest gun reform. My opponent sided with the extremists and voted against it. Again, I think if you look up Mark's website, you can see more of his feelings on this issue.
Jim?
Well, I will comment. For 5 years, I worked at Crisis City and setting up the drills and the training for the active shooters, and watching all the officers come through and learn the techniques. But that's a reactive action. Something bad has happened, and they're just reacting to it. We need to find proactive answers that stop this from ever coming about. And I'm sorry it's out of my pay grade, but if I have an idea, I'll pass it on to our state legislatures.
Ann is now going to moderate questions submitted by the audience.
Thank you, and a number of you have submitted questions. We may have enough to get through the rest of the forum, but if you have any other questions, hold your hand up and they'll come get it. So, let's see. We're going to start with excuse me, the Secretary of State candidate, Jeanna Repass. What is a specific practice in the current Secretary of State office that should change to improve election integrity?
The current practice? Well, first of all, the Secretary of State turned off the function on the website that would allow you to know whether or not your ballot was cast provisionally. Now, if you go in to vote and you forgot your ID, or you've moved, or there's something that would indicate that there's a problem with where you were voting, you still have the right to vote. Don't let anyone ever turn you away. But that ballot would be cast provisionally. Then it's your responsibility to go to the clerk and make sure you change that. If you voted by mail or drop box, you may or may not know whether or not your vote was cast provisionally if there was an issue with your signature, or you transposed a couple of numbers when you're writing on your identifying numerics like your driver's license. The first thing that should happen is that we need to go in there and reinstate that button, and we need to know every Kansan, Republican or Democrat, has the right to know if the vote that you cast was counted. So that's the first thing we're going to go do. There's a whole bunch more, but I'm going to try to address these straight on.
Thank you. The next question is for the County Commission candidate, Mr. Weese. What are the top 3 challenges our county faces?
Well, that's a question that is dynamic. It changes all the time. Right now, if you're putting out fires in the county, it's trying to find housing, room for the 2 new judges that the state so nicely gave us, but now we need to fund it. And we are shuffling people around the county building, having to set up offices, and it comes at a cost. And fortunately, we were able to take some ARPA funds that helped quite a bit in getting this done, but it is quite a hurdle to get over to get these 2 new judges together up with all the others. They all want to be in the same building. They want to be same offices. So trying to make that happen is our biggest problem. I don't know if I'm going to have time for 2 more.
Okay. Thank you. The Kansas House candidates and the Saline County candidate. What are your plans for combating the opioid epidemic and drug abuse in our state or our county? Let's start with Sarah Cruz.
As Steve said earlier, I wish I had a plan. Again, it's a complex issue that I'm not sure can be addressed in a 1-minute answer. Opioid addiction is a tragedy that has happened across the country, and it's been driven by economics and by so many things. And I think access to preventative programs and also mental health and access to ways of counseling, all sorts of different things that the community could provide. And maybe some of this falls under expanding Medicaid as well, you know, just getting the care that they need.
Stephen Howe?
Addiction certainly runs fairly deep across all sectors of our country, even in our community, whether it's opioids or perhaps it's another addiction to alcohol or other things. Right now it seems to be smartphones, and the next generation can't get off of them. You know, a lot of these things have consequences. As it relates to opioids, I do know there is some legislation the House worked on this past session. One dealt with the definition of drug paraphernalia, and I did support an amendment to that bill that would have taken fentanyl testing strips off of that definition. Now, if you're an addict and you have access to fentanyl testing strips, that can tell you whether or not you're messing with something that shouldn't be trifled with. There's a lot of overdoses and things that could be prevented to save lives.
Thank you. Mr. Weese?
Well, I will say that Saline County Commission, the county itself, has partnered and spent quite a bit helping with the Central Kansas Mental Health and other organizations, CKF. Even in the new jail that is under construction right now, there are areas of that are set up for mental health, the well-being of the inmates, trying to help them while they're doing their time, while they're incarcerated, try to see if we can help them in that environment with the right training, right psychologists, psychiatrists, whatever they need to try to stop this addiction.
Thank you. The next question is for the U.S. Senate candidate, Janice, for Mark Holland. What would you like to see done for working families in the U.S. Senate?
Now, Janice.
Let me just see what he says about that. I know. Well, I'm going to go back to his background. He's a third-generation Methodist minister. He's had success in local government, county government, and I think he will work on this to the best of his. This is an issue that I know he cares about, and that he will work on it to the best of his ability.
Thank you. The Secretary of State, one more question for you. Just a minute. Do we have any more questions coming up?
Yes.
Okay. All right. What is the meaning of transparency? What does that look like?
The meaning of transparency is, let me be very clear, and I was going to use this in my closing. We're not asking you just to elect us. We're asking you to hire us to do a job. There are 2.9 million people in the state of Kansas, which means as your Secretary of State, I have 2.9 million bosses. And when your boss asks you for something, you give it to him, and you show him exactly what you've been working on. Transparency means that when you go to the website, if you have a question, it ought to be able to be answered. And if you can't find it there ought to be a phone number that you can call, and a human being's going to answer it and answer your question. And if you have a question about whether or not your vote counted, or how the process took place, or what the machines were, or what the water mic looks like, that should be answered. Transparency is simply this. You ask a question and you get a straightforward answer. That's one of the reasons I'm sitting here right now. I didn't know what the questions were going to be. I just came here to be as transparent and open with you and give you the most honest answers possible. As the Secretary of State, that's what you will continue to get from me. That's what transparency looks like.
Thank you. We have several questions for the House candidates. Okay. And we're ready to start with Stephen Howe. Is that who we're ready for, I think? What can you give reasons for how that Kansas has not expanded Medicaid, and what? Just a minute here. It mentions the 10% that will become a line item if it passes. Do you know what that is referring to? About if it passes, the 10% that would become a line item if it passes. There's a question about expanding Medicaid, and what are your plans to cover the 10% that would become a line item if it passes?
Well, that's certainly a concern as it relates to Medicaid expansion. This predates my time in the legislature, something that's been going on for quite some time. In the last 2 years, it really hasn't come up in terms of a bill that has received action on the House floor. There's been amendments and kind of almost in a jokingly way of talking about it, probably because people that brought it up knew there wasn't enough votes to pass it. I'm open to having the discussion and what it means for people of Kansas. There are concerns about people that are currently on Medicaid, those that are currently on waiting lists, those that are disabled and things like that. So how would the state pay for it is probably the biggest question, especially in light of a possible recession and a drop in state revenues, also a drop in federal ARPA dollars. So I'm open to the discussion.
Thank you. Sarah?
Something to consider is that right now the body of the House of Representatives is made up of 86 Republicans and 39 Democrats, which gives them a 69% advantage. And we need to flip 3 seats in order to invite the other side to really participate in bipartisanship. And I think that, what he just said, like it was almost happening in a joking manner because we knew that there weren't enough votes to pass, is a little cavalier in terms of this is something super important. And if we had a bit more of a balance in point of views, we could all meet at the table and actually have this conversation. It's my understanding that 90% of it is covered by federal funds, and with, I've got to stop.
Okay. Thank you.
I was going to address that 10%.
Let's see. This is for Jim Weese. Is there any plan to address the growing homeless population locally?
Well, I can't specifically name the organization, but I know some funding was made available for, I think it's called GRACE, if I'm not mistaken. We've made monies available for GRACE to start a program to help with the homeless. I get calls, emails quite a bit from constituents that want to know what we can do as a county. Most of our homeless situation is within the city limits, and it's hard for a county commission to dictate what the city will do about a homeless situation. We try to support the city, whether it be through some fundings, whether it be through the mental health programs that are available, because most of our homeless people have outlying circumstances that bring about this homelessness. So,
thank you. The next one will go to the 3 state-level people, for Secretary of State and the House of Representatives. What is your position on the amendment to allow the legislature to revoke or suspend executive branch rules or regulations, and why? This is the other, there was one constitutional amendment about the sheriffs, and there's another constitutional amendment allowing the legislature to decide on all the rules and regulations that come out of the executive branch. So what's your position on that, and why? Let's start with Jeanna Repass.
Well, I oppose the amendment. I will tell you again, ask yourself why and when you have people trying to amend your state constitution. Number two, this is an overreach by the legislature to take more power away from the executive offices and put it into their own hands. Now, right now, what you have is a supermajority on the Republican side. But I want you to ask yourself, Republican or Democrat, let's just say you all of a sudden get a supermajority in the Democratic Party. Do you want those people to override the chief executive offices? They can do that right now by overriding vetoes, and they can do that out of committees. But there are going to be things pertinent to your executive offices that your local House reps or Senate reps will not understand or know. Therefore, I do not support them having oversight into executive offices. I don't necessarily know that everyone's going to know what's going on, let's say, in your Attorney General's office. And do you want your House reps overriding what your Attorney General or Chief Law Enforcement Officer is going to implement? So I would say no to that. I do not support it, and I think that we have a great check and balance in our House right now.
Let's see. Sarah Cruz?
I absolutely agree with everything Jeanna Repass just said. And I also think it's a tremendous overreach. And we have a system that works really well right now. And I love that she pointed out that example of, like, what if it switches? You know, this is now something that the Republican majority has brought forth, but let's say that does switch and there's a Republican governor, and, you know, suddenly it's not looking so great to be able to cancel any legislation that or statement that she's trying to make. I'm sorry, I've lost my words all of a sudden. Anyway, she said it really well, and I agree with everything Jeanna said.
It's a good day. I'm like, I need to come often. Please talk to my kids.
Okay. Okay, Stephen Howe.
Thank you for the question. I did support this proposed constitutional amendment, which goes to the people. Only the people of Kansas can amend the Kansas Constitution. The legislature cannot do that unilaterally. There is a track record of a lot of government agencies making rules and regulations that have an impact on small business and people that are trying to engage in commerce and things like that. There's numerous examples on my Facebook page, Representative Stephen Howe, that cite specific examples this proposed constitutional amendment seeks to address. Now, I've worked for 2 members of Congress, and it happens at the federal level all the time. Bureaucrats can outlive any elected representative. And who are they accountable to? Is it the people's elected representatives that make laws, or do you want bureaucrats making laws?
Thank you. This is our last question, and it goes to Jim Weese. Should the county consider revisions to codes to allow a smaller footprint and greener homes to be built? Or how can the state incentivize this? Should I address this to the state people too? Let's just start with you. Okay.
Let's have one more time, please.
Okay. Should the county consider revisions to codes to allow a smaller footprint and greener homes to be built?
Well, in the county, the construction of homes, where I think you're talking maybe the tiny homes or this and that, I don't know of any rules we have as far as square footage of what occupancy needs to be. So I don't want to give bad information right now. As far as inside the city has their own planning and zoning. They decide what will happen and how that's done. So I don't know the zoning ordinances well enough to even address the question. I apologize.
Okay, thank you. Sounds like you're saying that would be a question to ask the city, maybe. Okay, that is all our questions from the audience. So Margaret is going to moderate the 1-minute candidate closing remarks.
Jim Weese, we'll start with you.
Lucky me. Okay. You know, a poll was taken recently by the 311 newspaper asking citizens their approval ratings for national, state, county, and city elected officials. Saline County was given the highest ranking at 73% approval. I would like to think that my efforts as a county commissioner have played a part in this, and I look to continue and improve this approval on the job done by the county commission. I would appreciate your vote on November 8th to be able to continue my efforts to make Saline County a strong, vibrant community. Thank you much.
Stephen Howe.
Again, thank you, Salina Tech, as well as the Salina League of Women Voters for having us out this afternoon. I am the only candidate on the ballot for state representative in the 71st District. So I do look forward to working on challenges that are before us, whether it's housing, healthcare, or education. In education, I think it's unacceptable that 66% of fourth graders are not proficient in reading. I think it's also unacceptable that eighth graders not proficient in math in this state is 67%. Something has to change, and we need to look at doing things, getting to the root of the problem. Why are these things happening in Kansas? And it's not just unique to Kansas, but in other states as well. So I'm open to having discussion, being transparent, and each day I drive back and forth to Topeka when we're in session, and I've never missed a vote yet. Thank you.
Sarah Cruz.
Thank you. Thanks to Salina Tech and the League of Women Voters. This is my first venture into politics. I work in the field of death and dying and after-death care. And one of the most important skills that I've learned working with the dying and their families is how to listen. Because people of all walks of life die. Republicans and Democrats and unaffiliated. And guess what? None of that matters at end of life. So I've learned how to listen to people, to what makes people's lives meaningful, what really matters to them, and what concerns them. So good listening is a unique and compassionate skill that I will bring to the job of House of Representatives if I am given the privilege of representing the 69th District.
Jeanna Repass.
Yes, so thank you again. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the League of Women Voters. Thank you for Salina Tech. And I kind of gave you a little bit of my closing that I'm not just asking for your vote, I'm asking you to hire me. And trust me, this is a very extensive job application, but it's one I would take very seriously. I'm the wife of a tradesman who's got farmers in his family both sides. My son Adam played football at Kansas State. He's employed on television in Kansas City, thank you, Lord. My daughter is a medical student at KU Med, and my baby is a freshman at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. So now my job is to serve the people of Kansas. I've raised my kids, and it's now time to serve you. Let me just say this, our democracy is strong, it is wonderful, but it is also fragile, and it requires us all to believe in it and to get out and vote. And let me say this, do not vote for a Republican, a Democrat, or a Libertarian. Vote for the best candidate. If you do what you have always done, you will get what you have always gotten. This is an opportunity to get something different. I'm asking for your vote and your support so I can be your next Secretary of State to protect your right and democracy. Thank you.
Finally, Janice Norlin.
One issue that it was touched on, but not in a question to Mark, and I will say this in his words. The separation of church and state is central to why I am running. The most pressing religious issue right now is abortion. Regardless of our religious views about abortion, there is no role for the government to force a particular religious view on anyone else. My opponent wants the government to enforce his religious beliefs. He struck Roe versus Wade down. I will restore it. I will codify Roe versus Wade. I will bring common sense and courage to Washington. I will work across the aisle to bring real solutions to Kansas. With Mark's permission, I'd like to close with a statement I recently read this week in The Atlantic by Tom Nichols. Americans once expected politicians to carry themselves with a seriousness that indicated their ability and willingness to tackle problems, whether poverty or war, that were too difficult for the rest of us. We elected such people not because we wanted them to be like us. Come see me if you want to know the rest of that statement.
Okay. That's the end of our questions and our comments from our candidates. We want to thank the candidates for coming. Thank you for running for office. Thank you all for showing up and listening. Remember that these are not the only candidates, there are others, and you can look them up. We are happy that they came here to give their views on issues that are important to all of us. I want to remind you that also on the November 8th ballot, there are 2 proposed constitutional amendments that we've heard about here today, and there are also many judges that are up for retention votes. Judges come up for retention every few years. If they have just been appointed, they come up the next year, and people have a chance to vote on them and say, yes, let them keep going, or let's not have them keep going. Because of those judges on the ballot on November 8th, we have invited 2 retired Kansas Supreme Court justices to speak to the League of Women Voters and anyone else who wants to come on the evening of Thursday, October 20th at 7 o'clock at the Courtyard Hotel by Marriott, which is at 3020 Riffle Drive, which in our household is considered near Tractor Supply, off of South 9th Street. I again thank you, and I want to turn it over to Alex.
Thank you. I'm Alex. I'm a second-year student at Salina Tech in the construction program and also on the Student Government Association. We want to thank all of the candidates for coming and for your willingness to run for office. We'd also like to thank the media panel who volunteered their time. We'd like to thank the Smoky Hills PBS for videoing our event. Thank you to the Salina League of Women Voters. Thank you. And we'd also like to thank Salina Tech for supporting this event. We urge everyone to register to vote at www.ksvotes.org by October 18th, and then be sure to vote on or before November 8th. Thank you.
In our increasingly electrified society, that's where a resilient grid matters most. ITC Great Plains is ensuring the greater grid can meet our energy needs now and long into the future. Learn more at itc-holdings.com.